Hi, I'm a former higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. I often wish that there was a simple formula that you could apply to branding projects and just easily and conveniently get them out the door. But I know there isn't one. That said, my guest this week is Dr. Allison Steinke, a faculty member at the University of Minnesota's Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication, of which I am a graduate. She is a prolific creator and has published an internationally acclaimed dissertation on solutions journalism and has authored more than 100 blog posts and journalistic articles. And she recently published this definitive book, Brand Thinking, Building Brands You Can Believe In, which actually walks you through the steps you need to take and the things you need to consider as you build a brand. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You're listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, the podcast where marketing minds in higher ed come to pull back the curtain, spill a little tea, and talk honestly about what it takes to market in this industry. I'm Jaime Hunt, the founder of Solve Higher Ed, author of Heart Over Hype, and a former campus CMO who spent more than 2 decades navigating the weird, wonderful world of higher education marketing. This show is for the strategists, the storytellers, the change agents, and anyone who has ever tried to get Faculty Senate on board with a rebrand. Here we get candid about the challenges and share the ideas that are shaping the future of our field. Sound like your kind of conversation? Then let's get into it. Hey, Allison, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
There's something extra exciting about talking to someone from your alma mater, so I'm super happy to have you here.
Hubbard School is the school to be at. So really great also to hear that you have gone on from a journalism school into all things marketing. I love to emphasize that cross-disciplinary skill set that we give students and be like, the world's your oyster.
I know so many people who started out their careers as journalists. And I think if you think about good marketing as being good storytelling, it makes total sense. And I really like how marketing brings that storytelling and that science of marketing together into kind of something that's different, but also very much the same. It's an exciting career path, I think. So I love your book. It's Brand Thinking, Building Brands You Can Believe In. I would love to hear what inspired you to write it and what were the gaps that you wanted to fill with this book.
It's actually a really cool University of Minnesota origin story, actually. So you'll appreciate hearing this. There is an alumnus of the Hubbard School of Journalism named Marty Brandt, and he wrote the foreword to our book. And he actually spent his career after the Hubbard School building a brand consultancy for a lot of tech companies in Silicon Valley and then across Europe and Asia. He worked with brands like HP, Acer, Deloitte. And he really, throughout his career, wanted to unpack this concept of belief. It's this kind of it factor, this charisma or this allure that certain brands have and others don't. And so he really dedicated his career to helping brands unpack what is it that makes you distinct. And he came back to the Hubbard School in 2022 as an alumnus and a donor, wanting to fund a research project to unpack and further define that concept of brand believability. And so I was one of the lucky faculty members who got to meet with him when he came to campus. And per my director's greeting, we went off to the races. And with some fellow faculty, including Hassan Park, my co-author on the book, we designed a research project interviewing chief marketing officers, hosting focus groups with consumers, largely from Generation Z. And we built out a framework about brand thinking, about brand believability. And Marty was thrilled to see this come to life. And even still today, we've been able to infuse these concepts into our classes at the Hubbard School, but also to really encourage industry leaders outside of the U and educators outside of the U to better understand branding and how to apply this framework in a way that's actionable. So it's been a really cool project that's been evolving since 2022. But this book has been a few years in the making, and we're just so excited to have it out in the world now.
I love that it came from a research project or from a donor. You don't hear that story very often. That is phenomenal. I teach higher ed marketing at West Virginia University, and I can see potentially using this in my class as required reading for the class. Like you said, frameworks really help people apply things where it's not so like kind of high and lofty or whatever, like it's actual actionable things that you can do. my audience is primarily higher ed, and higher ed institutions, when we come in as CMOs, we're often inheriting brands that have been around for sometimes centuries, at the minimum decades. How would a framework from this book help leaders sort of honor that legacy rather than feel trapped by it, but be able to kind of build a brand that has that believability?
Yeah, that is a super great question. And in my industry experience a lifetime ago, I actually worked in marketing communications at Wheaton College in Illinois. So it's a private liberal arts college. But essentially, I was really excited to integrate a lot of perspectives from higher education in this book, including you and your insights, but also several other CMOs from higher ed institutions across the nation. And in addition to those higher ed CMOs, we talked with legacy brands like CBS or Taylor Corporation, who were like 50, 100 plus years old. And one of the things that stuck out most to me from those interviews with the more legacy brands was the importance of consistency, yes, and honoring that legacy, because legacy lends credibility oftentimes because of the value that comes with the student experience and hundreds, if not thousands, tens of thousands of alumni who have come out of those institutions over decades, but also the importance of innovation. And so one thing that the CMO of CBS actually said was, coming up on a 100-year anniversary, do you want to think of yourself as 100 years old or 100 years young? And if you think of yourself as being 100 years young, what invitations does that bring for you to create a platform to innovate within your brand culture in a way that's authentic and consistent with what's already been established, but also in a way that upholds the quality of that brand moving forward in a co-created sort of process with Gen Z, Gen Alpha, Gen Beta, like all of those perspectives coming up through the funnel. It becomes this kind of interactive and engaging process of co-creation that we talk quite a bit about throughout the manuscript as well.
I think co-creation is under-respected or underused when we're building brands in higher ed. I think a lot of times we don't always bring everybody into the conversation. And I think when you're co-creating, having a resonant brand and having a brand that people rally behind and really get enthusiastic about, I think that requires a lot of buy-in. And if you're not getting the campus community, the alumni community, depending on where you're located, that those town and gown conversations, if you're not getting them in for that, first of all, you're missing a ton of excellent perspectives. But two, it's a lot more difficult to build that connection to the brand or build that buy-in, I feel like.
Absolutely. And purpose is something that we kept coming back to too. And it's a whole section in the book just about how important your brand purpose is. And for higher ed institutions, they know better than any this concept of post-truth or this post-truth era that we're living in. And it's a big problem for brands, for higher ed institutions, because there's these misinformation, disinformation flying around about everything. And people can't agree on how to know. There's fallible ways of knowing. And this disagreement is just so prevalent. And so the more that brands can create a purpose, the better. And that can be done in a number of ways. But one way that we found to be most effective is to create a purpose statement. And that's something that I encourage a lot of my readers and leaders to think about is, yes, you might have a mission statement, you might have a vision statement. Do you have a purpose statement? And if not, why not? And what could that look like? And obviously, mission statements and vision statements can be infused with purpose, but there's also a place for a purpose statement that stands apart. And so that's just something where these conversations are kind of happening. Some brands are taking this in stride and really going off to the races with purpose statements. And that could be a way to really be a grounding point or value that you can bring your stakeholders around to create some momentum in a way that's sticky and spreadable. So that's one thing, or a tip that we kind of found in our conversations, was that this overarching sense of purpose can really help overcome that problem of post-truth. And like you're mentioning, be a rallying cry for alumni, students, faculty, staff together. So how can you create that together is a really big thing, and listening too.
I love that. I lean heavily on listening sessions when I do work with clients on brands, because I feel like, you can read between the lines on what people are saying. You can read body language. You can feel the enthusiasm or lack thereof about things. And all that qualitative data can be analyzed and really kind of suss out sort of that nugget of a brand. But I want to kind of shift over to the idea of like brand believability, because you talked about we're living in this post-truth era. I never know. Is something at this point generated by AI, the amount of vetting I do before I make a statement about something that's happening in the world is kind of bonkers to me at this point. But I want to probe on that brand believability, and what does believability look like in a university setting when there's such a wide range of audience and stakeholders, from students to legislators to donors, that are all experiencing that brand in a different way. How does believability look like?
I actually was just listening to a podcast you did with an enrollment officer and talking about silos and how important it is to break those down. I think it's so important that those social listening sessions are happening, that you facilitate those, because those conversations are what break ice and really help everyone get on the same page. And so really the brand thinking framework that we're arguing for at higher ed institutions, every institution has a belief system of some kind. They have a purpose, they have a culture on campus, even outside of campus, like alumni communities have their own culture. And then there's a design and there's an experience involved with every touch point. The brand experience at a higher ed institution is so unique because yes, it involves students, but like you mentioned, there's so many other stakeholder groups, and that's a beautiful thing. But getting everyone on the same page, really, you have to be intentional with having those conversations. And so I love that. And then growth, as you grow as an institution, you're segmenting markets, you're choosing different channels and outreach methods, and you're being intentional about your communication. You're doing paid, earned, owned, and shared media across channels to then build that growth and enroll more students and all that kind of thing. The strategy that you take with that is, with your marketing maturity framework, it takes research, it takes assessment. It's always good to measure twice, cut once, right? And so with the brand architecture too, then, and your position in the market, every higher ed institution has competitors. And so who's out there? What is your competitive advantage? Just continually assessing those things is important. And the final part of the brand thinking framework that surrounds this believability concept is social influence. And today I'd argue that's more important than ever, in the sense that Gen Z, Gen Alpha, Gen Beta coming up, I'm sure, is going to care a lot about the climate crisis, sustainability, any social responsibility and partnerships that your institution might have, opportunities for service they might be able to participate in as students. And then how does your brand resonate? Does it have this emotional attachment and this credibility that students desire for this sense of belonging and inclusion? I know you talk quite a bit about that in our interview, and we quote that in the book, just how important it is to be authentic with your messaging and to be authentic with your marketing initiatives. Because if you're recruiting a certain segment of students and you promise them an experience that doesn't end up being fulfilled when they enroll, then that's a failed promise. That's not believable, and that is not helpful for your brand either over time. And so that authenticity is key. And that brings us into the center of that framework that we talk about, which is believability. And we provide a pyramid structure to illustrate this. We just thought it was helpful to kind of see the building blocks that build up into believability. And so there's 6 values or norms that we really argue are important to pay attention to. And those are authenticity, consistency, innovation, quality, emotional attachment, and credibility. And so we think that if you've got those 6 components, it's elusive. It can be really challenging to get everyone locked in and in lockstep with all of those qualities and values. But if you can have those things in sync, you're more likely to have a believable brand. And so that's kind of the framework in a nutshell.
I absolutely love that. And my gut, I'm not a researcher. In a lot of ways, I wish I could be. My gut tells me that if your brand isn't believable, it doesn't matter what your rankings are. It doesn't matter what your price point is. If you aren't in sync with what they're actually experiencing, if it's inauthentic or isn't believable, that can have a big impact on whether a student thinks that you're the right place for them. But I wanted to get your take on that as someone who has done a lot of research on this.
Yeah, 100%. There's a couple questions that we've gotten from executives after publishing this. And one of them is, what's the relationship between believability, trust, and loyalty? And so just like you're saying, we really do see believability as a building block or a pathway toward trust and toward loyalty. That, just like you said, if you are not a believable brand, you won't gain trust and you will not have a loyal following. And so our attempt in building out this believability concept was to create this really applicable framework to kind of reverse engineer and say, okay, from the ground up, how can we quantify the student experience, quantify the alumni experience, and kind of see how this is playing out chronologically over time? Are there pain points? Are there opportunities for us to dig deeper? And so in that, yes, the framework is really applicable to kind of better understand how trust and loyalty can be cultivated. And I would say price point and awards and rankings and things like that build into the credibility piece of a student experience at a higher ed institution. I would almost kind of group them in with that, but also say that emotional attachment in tandem is necessary, that emotional attachment and credibility work together, but you can't have an emotional attachment with a student unless that credibility comes first. So when a student comes to enroll in your institution, there's a reason that they chose to apply. There's a reason they chose to visit campus, and word of mouth referrals are so powerful. And maybe they heard from someone that they had a good experience. Maybe they heard from someone that they had a bad experience, and they want to learn more about that themselves to kind of get that 360 analysis. And you can redeem negative experiences for good with authentic and consistent messaging. And that's something that I don't want to kind of miss either, is that failing fast is something we talk about in the book, and that failure is actually a catalyst for innovation in many realms. And there's something we talk about, it's called intelligent failures. And so if you can be intelligent about the ways that you're failing, that can actually be constructive in some ways. And so just don't think of anything as end all be all, right? Like, I think that credibility and bringing in rankings and price points, it's all an evolving conversation if you think about that and how it impacts people emotionally as well.
I love that pairing. It's almost like that same pairing between journalism and marketing and storytelling and data, and thinking about it through that lens. For an example, this is our student to teacher ratio. However, you also have to do some storytelling around why that matters, what that means for the student experience. When you look at why students make decisions, they'll often list off those tangible things. But if you probe, it's often, I just got a really good vibe, or I really felt like I was going to belong here. And it's just to become those intangibles as much as it is the tangible items. So I love how you guys talk about that framework. I've worked on many campuses. I'm really curious about the role that employees and faculty play in shaping brand believability, and where is there risk when the internal culture and external messaging are misaligned?
I want to kind of go back to that previous question you were talking about a little bit, in the sense that capturing that emotion and how to do that and how to quantify emotion, because sentiment matters so much. And this matters, yes, to campus culture and faculty and employees as well, also to the student experience. And something that we noted, we try to include applications throughout the book as well that might be helpful, but journey mapping is something that can be really helpful to capture a student journey, an employee journey, a faculty journey, whatnot. And just like you mentioned, those share outs of emotional pain points, but also opportunities and successes, like empathy mapping with journey mapping can be another layer to journey mapping and better understanding, okay, how did this person experience this? What emotions are linked to each other, linking back to maybe it might be a building on campus, for example, right? Like if there's a building that has a specific kind of charisma or allure for certain students or faculty for some reason, why is that? And you can further unpack kind of what might come with that. Is it a specific class that was in that building? Is it an extracurricular activity? And those kind of things. So yeah, it's just a really cool way, journey mapping and empathy mapping, to capture those moments and really illustrate them in a way that's visual, because the visual diagramming is so key here too with regard to strategy. So anyway, for what it's worth, I just wanted to mention that. And moving on to the role of employees and faculty and brand culture, I think that employees, faculty, staff are so much about living the brand. We have an internal branding exercise in the brand culture chapter that actually Marty Brandt used in industry for decades, but it's super applicable to higher ed campuses as well, in the sense that it's called the knowing, caring, and doing framework. And so it helps us to understand, okay, does everybody know this campus, this college, this university's mission? Do we all know its values? Do we know why it was founded? Do we know the enrollment demographics? Do we know the brand inside and out? If not, why not? Kind of seeing the CMO or the marketing office as an educational home, a place where you can kind of help constituents on campus better understand why you do what you do. And that kind of goes back to the purpose statement too. If you've got kind of catchphrases or statements that really ground the campus, the brand, and you can share those out frequently, that is going to help with the consistency of the knowing piece of a brand's culture as it's lived out through its employees, faculty, staff, all the like. And then the caring piece, knowing, caring, doing. Do people actually care about what they're doing? That also plays into the empathy mapping. It plays into those storytelling pieces that you were mentioning, really telling a story of what brought you to campus as a faculty member, what brought you to campus as a staff member, and how do you interface with students? Do you have mentorship opportunities? Do you have opportunities to speak into the formulation of the brand and its enrollment marketing? Just kind of making that a constant symbiosis, whether it be through pulse surveys or just conversations, like you're mentioning, focus groups, really compelling way, getting people around a table talking about the brand and its culture and values and how that is communicated to students and external constituents. And then that doing piece of the framework. So like, what are you doing to actually enact the brand values? Are you being authentic about that? When you leave campus, how do you talk about your job? How do you talk about your students? How do you talk about the brand? And what's the brand's reputation in the community? Like you're mentioning town and gown, legislators and things. Like bad press isn't necessarily bad press in the sense that those, I don't want to say false narratives, but with the mis and disinformation flying around for a PR officer or anyone in a marketing department who's trying to track social conversations happening around a higher education brand, you can help own that narrative. You can't control it, but you can help own it if you can really enact those brand values in the community in a way that's authentic. Because some CMOs that we interviewed were talking about how Gen Z, Gen Alpha will see straight through inauthentic brand messaging. They will see straight through that. And so it's very important to have your ear to the ground with regard to what the brand values are, whether or not those resonate with your current students. And if they don't, where that disconnect is, and really helping to spell out kind of bringing students into more of the employee, faculty, staff culture and vice versa to have more of those touch points so that the brand experience and the brand promise can be more consistent over time.
I find that internal audience is often disregarded when it comes to like the brand rollout. We're all focused on the external audiences. And I think building those internal ambassadors, not just from the, we want them to be saying the messaging that we're saying, but also if we want them to be delivering the experience that we're promising, they need to know what that experience is. They need to feel ownership of it. And that just happened for me so beautifully at Winston-Salem State that community was like, since we co-created, we internally built the brand, we co-created it with the faculty, students, staff together. That gave it that like, yeah, we're all behind this. And what we found as a result of that was our students, if there was something negative posted at that time on Twitter, our students would be like, we don't air our dirty laundry in the public. This is not the WSSU way. I remember being like, what in the world? Usually there'd be a dog pile of everybody being like, and another thing. But this was like students basically calling each other out for, no, this isn't emblematic of what WSSU is. This is a one-time thing. We need to stay off social with it. It was magical.
That is a perfect case study. I love to hear that. Yeah, the brand ambassador is just so organic.
Yeah, and so we had a formal ambassador program toward the end of my time there, but we started with employees. We found the employees that were like, they were all in on WSSU and really charged them with helping cheerlead that enthusiasm with the networks that they had on campus. We looked for like those informal influencers, people that everybody trusted and liked. The campus photographer always knows everybody. They should be an ambassador to really cheerlead internally. And so I just love that like validation that that's a thing that we should be doing to build strong and believable brands.
And fandom is something we talk about in the book, and you just described it perfectly. It's like everyone is at a higher ed institution for a reason, especially staff and faculty. It's their full-time job. So why are they there? Like you mentioned, sure, some of them might be alumni and kind of have that connection, but some come from outside and really want to be there in more of a kind of nurturing fashion. And that's something like the brand personality. Every higher ed institution has a personality of some kind, and to really unearth that and have it be a part of the brand values and the positioning and the purpose statement, all the things. I think of Andy Cunningham as a strategist, and we quote her in the book because she came up with 3 archetypes of brands: a mother, a mechanic, and a missionary. And she says that most, if not all, brands meet one of those archetypes. And so I feel like this nurturing, this caring that you were mentioning with that example on social, the students came around, the employee base came around really in a protective sort of way and saying, actually, that's not how we do things here. And in that, the brand was activated in a way that protected it, but that wasn't something you could have manufactured. And that is a beautiful thing. So very cool example.
We also had where students would post, like, I got accepted to WSSU, and alumni would come out of the woodwork and be like, welcome to the Ramley. You're going to love it. And to me, that's, if somebody did that, if I was applying to grad school or something and a bunch of alumni were like, hey, we're so excited for you, welcome to the family, I feel like that would be like, okay, this is something special, which kind of pivots me to this idea of, you talk about the it factor, and you touched on it a little bit earlier. And it really strikes me as something that higher ed really struggles with, because we kind of are delivering the same product. A high quality education taught by dedicated faculty in an inspiring environment is like kind of what we're all doing. But you talk about the solution to that being believable brand design and experience. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, this it factor, you know what's so funny is design and experience is such an elusive thing because it's so subjective. Everyone has opinions and thoughts about what makes an amazing brand. Logo, the colors, the typography, everything that goes into that. And all of a sudden you go into some sort of rebrand, especially at higher ed institutions, and everyone thinks they're a designer. Right. Like everyone thinks that they have the best idea about how they can represent their brand, their institution visually and experientially and things like that. And as we were really kind of framing out this chapter, what is the problem, right? What's the problem that faces brands, and why does it matter that they come up with a compelling design and experience? And what's so funny about it is this it factor. Craig Groeschel is a thought leader. He hosts a podcast. He's actually a pastor. So he's at churches. It's like one of the biggest church networks in the US. But he has said that the it factor can't be defined, that it defies definition. And in that, he comes up with 7 principles that you can use to build a compelling it factor, but that it's never guaranteed. And so in that, it's almost like virality, right? We talk about this at the Hubbard School, that you can't predict or come up with this formula of what's going to go viral, like Charlie bit my finger on YouTube, or any number of YouTube videos that we've seen over the decades that go viral. There's not really necessarily an exact formula. You can predict why a brand takes off or not. But there are certain principles that we can come up with that'll help brands better define themselves. And so we already talked quite a bit about authenticity, but authenticity and consistency across touch points, it's like, how are you telling that brand story, and how does it come across in different channels and different outreach methods, and how can you be innovative in the delivery of that experience? And thinking about different elements of design, because I think campuses and the college experience in particular, like I mentioned with campus buildings, there's always a spatial element to a campus. And so how are you talking about your campus spaces, and how is it organized in its physical and digital environments? So is the brand experience consistent when a student's exploring online? Are there kind of video walkthroughs and tours that they can engage with, so that when they step on campus for the first time, it feels like it did when they were touring digitally or with physical collateral from the marketing department, et cetera? And obviously there's design and elements, like I mentioned, with logos and typography and color, and being intentional about all those things is so important. And it all plays together with that spatial element in addition to any sort of communication design that you have. So digital, physical, mobile, how are you communicating with consistency, authenticity, and innovation? And it really requires buy-in and authentic leadership from the top down. And so I think there was a Harvard Business Review article recently talking about the purpose of purpose, and also how important it is that CEOs have a personality. And that was received with a little bit of pushback from, Wall Street and different places, where one would argue that too much personality can actually be harmful because it's all about the bottom line and the numbers. But that's another thing that matters, is the bottom line and the numbers. What does believability have to do with profitability? And how does that design and experience drive ROI? And ultimately, for a college experience, tuition dollars, donations from donors and alumni. All of these things are worth considering and thinking through when it comes to how you're designing the experiences of enrollment marketing and admissions, and also the student experience overall once they get to campus.
I love this idea of the CEOs having a personality as well. And I think on so many campuses, you could ask 10 students and have 9 of them say they don't even know who the president is. And hopefully the one that does know is for positive reasons and not because there was some sort of scandal they heard about. But I really love that idea of when it is appropriate to potentially help build your president's brand as an opportunity to reflect the institution in a way. Absolutely love that. I'm really curious. Do you have any examples of schools that are doing this just super well?
The University of Minnesota. Just kidding. But yeah, I mean, Dr. Rebecca Cunningham at the U right now is doing an incredible job of being in the community and walking us through a really tumultuous time in the Twin Cities in particular. And I think that we talk about this in the book too, but social influence and how is your institution relating to the community that you're a part of? Like you mentioned, every college has a different geography. They're related to different towns, cities, regions of the world. And though their alumni network might span the globe, right? And so I think that, yes, Dr. Cunningham is doing an incredible job at the U of M, especially in light of our current events, just being in the community, providing guidance and also empathy and support to students in a way that resonates with them through accessibility and inclusivity and providing opportunities for them to learn in more creative ways that doesn't necessarily mean coming to campus physically, right? So a lot of accommodations being done on the campus right now, which is super helpful for our student body who is struggling with a lot of what's happening. But beyond that, I think back to my time at Wheaton College, which is a private liberal arts school outside Chicago. And yes, it might be easier for students to get to know presidents at private liberal arts colleges just by nature of the schools being smaller, the campuses being smaller or landlocked or whatnot. But President Riken at Wheaton College did an incredible job connecting with students because he made it a priority to be where the students were. Like he would be in an intramural pickup basketball league on weekday mornings, like at least once a week he was playing basketball. He had a student advisory board that would have students come into his office and share with him on a weekly or monthly basis what's going on. It's a Christian college, so he had prayer groups in his office once a month as well. And that was a combination of faculty, staff, and students. And I was in that prayer group a few times. And it's just a really awesome way for him to open up his office, which is typically so closed off, like ivory tower, right? We hear this phrase ivory tower mentality so often, and rightfully so. University presidents are so busy and have so many constituents knocking at their doors. But I mean, and I think you've mentioned this, the student experience is what matters most at college. And so how can we really open up physically that space that presidents have at a university so students can see kind of what that's like, but also opening up spaces for feedback and having the president have listening sessions or to engage with intramural sports or clubs and things of that nature, being out on campus and interfacing with students in a way that becomes kind of endemic. This endemicity is something we talk about in the book too, just it becomes so natural and a part of the campus culture that people are like, oh yeah, President Riken, just saw him at basketball, or oh yeah, I just was in his office talking to him about the lunch at the cafeteria today. And so making kind of touch points like that a priority, I think are helpful.
I've worked at now, I don't even want to tell you how many campuses I've worked at. I think now, if I count Agnes Scott College, where I'm currently the interim CMO, 7 or 8, something like that, campuses. And most of the presidents that I have experienced have had their lunch on occasion in the student dining hall. The first president I worked for, he had his lunch almost every day in the employee lounge. I mean, it was like, oh, there's Dr. Trina having lunch in the employee lounge. It demystified, I think, that position. But it also, I think, insulates you a little bit from those crisis points. So if you've built this trustworthy relationship where you feel believable, I think to the going back to brand thinking, if you feel believable when there's something that feels out of step with what you believe about the person, you're more willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, and you're more willing to actually probe that and see if that's accurate. And I've seen that save a president who was quoted in the newspaper correctly, but it was misinterpreted what he had said. And the students were really upset about it. He had a town hall. He did not stand behind a podium. He sat on the edge of the stage and said, I will be here till midnight if you need me to be, to answer your questions. And within like 30 minutes, the temperature was just a totally different direction. But it was because he had the relationships existing with the students, and they didn't walk away going, well, he just, pulled the wool over our eyes. They walked away going, okay, yeah, what he said aligns with what I know about him. So like, I believe that I maybe misinterpreted that. There's so many things happening in higher ed right now that leaders really need that cover of relationships. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that point of view.
Yeah, the relationship piece is everything, really. It builds into the brand experience and those touch points. And the town hall element is so great. And that's something that I totally forgot to mention. But yeah, President Riken at Wheaton had town halls regularly surrounding various topics, or not even just pain points, like just celebrating kind of what's happening on campus and just being kind of an open place where people can bring their questions, concerns, and things in a way that's open and constructive. And so I actually kind of wish President Cunningham would do that at the U, right? And obviously, like I said, some of these things are a little bit easier at smaller institutions where the student body is more, a couple thousand students is a little bit easier to relate to in that way than 60,000 students across 7 campuses, like in the state of Minnesota. And so, yeah, I think that scale can present some challenges, but also opportunities if you have your ear to the ground and really can kind of discern through with an advisory board what will help build that believability for me, like as a president, as a leader on campus, to really make my voice heard so that I can hear from others in a way that builds that believability and then is a pathway toward that trust and that loyalty. That's a huge, huge opportunity, I think, is those town hall formats and open forums.
I want to touch on AI a little bit. So we know AI is being used, and it can accelerate content creation. It can allow for greater personalization. But as that's happening, what becomes important about brand thinking for universities?
Yeah, AI is a conversation in every single faculty meeting I'm a part of at the University of Minnesota. It's top of mind for institutions everywhere, obviously. And as we touch on in the book, I think every time that AI enters the conversation, you can't have that conversation without first talking about the ethics, talking about the policies and the legalities around AI, because obviously, like, depersonalization and anonymizing student data in particular, like, you can't release client data or any sort of individual data into an AI system without breaking the law and privacy regulations. And so very important to think about as a higher ed institution, okay, if we're going to implement some sort of AI system here, how can we do that in a way that's legal, in a way that's ethical, but also how does it fit our team here? And do we have the personnel and the skill set that we need to execute this authentically, consistently, and with a high quality? And so, yes, I think content creation, personalization, all those things are possible with AI, but whether or not those things can be done well has yet to be seen, in the sense that we've all seen through various, prompt engineering fails and exposés of various venture capital things that have, bubbles that burst. And I think we're coming to a place of plateau with AI. And I think it's because the students that I'm seeing, at least in my classrooms, are incredibly skeptical of it. Some because of the environmental impacts of data centers, others because of the ethics around the impact AI has on labor forces. And so I think thinking about AI critically and in light of the legalities and ethics around it is the most important thing, especially when you're talking about protecting student data and things like that. And I think that following students and following their thoughts and sentiments on these things is the most important thing. And you don't necessarily need AI for that. I think that we as humans can follow each other in a more empathetic way than AI ever could. I let my students use AI with no hesitation. With the University of Minnesota, we have contracts with various organizations. So we have a contract with Google Gemini, we have a contract with Microsoft Copilot, we have a contract with Adobe and some different systems that we're able to provide enterprise level data protection for our students who want to use AI. And so in that, I have my students and encourage them to use Notebook LM, Google Gemini, and Copilot because we have those enterprise data protected agreements. But anything outside of that, I make sure to warn them, hey, we do not have an agreement with this AI company. I don't trust anybody you shouldn't necessarily trust anybody either. Proceed with caution. And I think in that, I don't think AI necessarily is going to change the way enrollment goes at universities. I think there's a lot of scary stuff out there with regard to hallucinations, and people think they can learn things from AI, but what kind of education is that? You know what I mean? So It's an interesting conversation for sure, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that what becomes more important is making sure you're still telling authentic. I've seen some people get really excited about being able to create, let's say, a video of your president speaking Chinese for your Chinese students. To me, that erodes that authenticity. And it's problematic if that Chinese student then shows up on campus and goes and speaks to the president, and the president's like, oh, I don't speak Chinese. Like, that feels like a lie. And so I think we have to be really intentional about how we use AI and when we use AI. I think AI for content creation is one of the worst things that you can use AI for. I truly do.
Thank you for saying that as a trained journalist and editor. Like I resonate with that. I am with you 100%.
Yeah. What I see lacking right now is a lot of intentionality. I see a lot of folks making decisions around the technology. So they're like, oh, we're going to use Google, or we're going to use ChatGPT, or we're going to use Copilot, instead of thinking, what problems are we trying to solve? What are the use cases? And then using that sort of innovation process to think about where and when does it make sense to use AI, and then identify the tool that makes the most sense to do that. And so I'm really nervous about it becoming like social media or the web, where everybody's doing their own thing, and then we have a mess.
Well, unfortunately, we might already be there, Jamie. We might already be there. That's okay, though. Take heart.
I'm afraid we are. So my last question is, if you were advising a new higher ed CMO on day one, if you got to sit down with them and say like, hey, let's have a chat, what is the single most important mindset shift you would want them to make about brand?
I would encourage them to think of marketing less as promotion and more as an integrated belief system that they can co-create with their employees, faculty, staff, and students. And when I say belief system, what I mean by that is the purpose, the culture, and the design and experience that brand or that institution upholds. And how do you start? You start with who you are. Like, who are you, CMO? What do you bring to this role? And which values at this institution do you resonate with most deeply that you feel as though are going to carry us into the future? And so kind of putting the narrative into their hands and saying, okay, rather than promoting this brand, let's prove this brand. And we can prove it through having these conversations with each other, just like we'd mentioned. We can prove it by structuring this institution with an architecture that is less siloed and more collaborative. How can we do that? How can we work together to create spaces for that conversation to happen? And thinking about data is important, but that emotional resonance is also as important as that credibility that we were mentioning. So how can we co-create that believability with a combination of emotional attachment and credibility? And how can you help start that conversation by breaking down silos, creating spaces for collaboration and co-creation, and being authentic in the ways that you think about messaging and what you care about most as it relates to this institution and its role in the community and for students going into the future?
I think that would apply to anybody who's in a CMO role or aspiring to a CMO role, whether you're new, whether you've been one for a decade. I think it's a really great reminder. If folks want to connect with you or find a copy of the book, where can they find it?
Yeah, I have a website regularly updated, is ajsteinke.com. But otherwise, I am open to connecting on most socials. Just kind of Google my name. And also the book is for sale on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target. So Brand Thinking, Allison Steinke, it should pop up. We have pretty good SEO thanks to our amazing publisher at Bloomsbury. So yeah, just kind of Google is our friend in that sense.
And listeners, we'll have the link to this in the show notes for this episode as well. As always, you can find me on my website at solvehighered.com. You can find my book at heartoverhypebook.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, JaimeHunt. I love connecting with listeners. And until then, let's go bust some silos. Thanks for listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and contact drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.